Look up at the night sky on a clear evening, away from the city lights, and let your eyes adjust to the darkness. Thousands of stars reveal themselves, each one a sun, many likely surrounded by worlds of their own. It's beautiful, isn't it? Peaceful even. But what if that darkness is looking back? What if those distant points of light are observation posts, and Earth is not a planet among equals, but rather a specimen in a cosmic terrarium? Imagine our world as it appears from the void. A blue marble suspended in the black, wrapped in swirling white clouds, continents sketched in brown and green across its surface. Beautiful, yes. Precious, certainly. But also isolated. Quarantined, perhaps. Because there exists a theory, chilling in its implications, that suggests we are not alone in the universe, not by a long shot. We are instead the watched, the studied, the catalogued. This is the zoo hypothesis, and it proposes something far more unsettling than mere cosmic loneliness. It suggests that advanced alien civilizations know exactly where we are. They've found us. They've likely been observing us for a very long time. And they have made a deliberate, calculated decision to remain hidden from us, to avoid contact, to let us develop in isolation like animals in an enclosure, separated from the rest of the cosmic community by invisible barriers we cannot see and rules we did not write. Think about what that means. Every signal we've broadcast into space since the early 20th century, every radio wave, every television transmission, every deliberate message we sent to the stars, screaming our presence into the void. We've been calling out for decades, announcing ourselves with increasing desperation, hoping for an answer. And we have been met with only silence. Not the silence of an empty universe, but perhaps the silence of a zoo after closing time, when the visitors have stopped talking and simply watched through the glass. We might be specimens under observation right now, at this very moment, studied by intelligences so far beyond us that we wouldn't even recognize them as alive. In the chapters ahead, we'll explore 6 disturbing pieces of evidence that suggest this hypothesis might be more than mere speculation. 6 reasons to suspect that the silence is not absence, but presence. That we are not alone, but deliberately kept separate. The question isn't whether anyone is out there. The question is why they won't let us know they're watching. The summer afternoon at Los Alamos National Laboratory in 1950 should have been unremarkable. A handful of physicists walking to lunch, discussing the mundane details of their day, their minds temporarily free from the weight of atomic secrets they carried. But Enrico Fermi, the brilliant Italian physicist who had helped usher in the atomic age, was about to ask a question that would haunt humanity for generations to come. They were talking about flying saucers. The topic had become peculiar, fodder for casual conversation in those years, filling newspapers with sensational accounts and blurry photographs. Someone mentioned a recent wave of UFO sighting. Someone else cracked a joke. They laughed. Then, as they settled into their seats in the laboratory cafeteria, Fermi suddenly stopped mid-bite and asked a question that seemed to come from nowhere. Where is everybody? His companions understood immediately. Fermi wasn't asking about the lunch crowd. He was asking about them. The aliens. The extraterrestrials. The vast cosmic intelligence that should, by all mathematical reasoning, be swarming throughout our galaxy. His question hung in the air like a challenge to the universe itself, and in that moment, Fermi had articulated what would become known as the Fermi Paradox, a puzzle that grows more disturbing the deeper you examine it. Let us consider the mathematics, because the numbers are what make this silence so profoundly unsettling. Our galaxy, the Milky Way, contains somewhere between 200 billion and 400 billion stars, not million, billion, .shand. Each one a sun, many of them larger and older than our own. For decades, we wondered how many of those stars might host planets, but we don't have to wonder anymore. The Kepler Space Telescope and other observation programs have given us the answer, and it's staggering. Virtually every star has at least one planet. Many have several. Conservative estimates suggest there are at least 100 billion planets in our galaxy alone. Now, let's be exceptionally cautious with our estimates. Let's assume that only 1% of those planets orbit in the habitable zone, that precious distance from their star where liquid water can exist. That still gives us 1 billion potentially habitable worlds. 1 billion planets where life could theoretically take hold. But let's be even more conservative. Let's say that only 1% of those habitable planets actually develop life. That's still 10 million worlds teeming with biology. And if only 1% of those worlds develop intelligent life capable of technology, we're looking at 100,000 civilizations in our galaxy right now. 100,000 civilizations. Think about that number. Let it settle into your mind. Not in the entire universe, which contains an estimated 2 trillion galaxies. Just here, just in our cosmic neighborhood, 100,000 species that could build radio telescopes, launch spacecraft, send signals into the void. And these estimates are considered pessimistic by many astronomers. But here's where the paradox becomes truly chilling. Our sun is young compared to many stars in the galaxy. The universe is 13.8 billion years old. Our sun is only 4.6 billion years old. There are stars out there that are 3 billion years older, 5 billion years older. Stars that formed when our sun was nothing but diffuse clouds of gas and dust. If life developed on planets around those ancient stars at roughly the same pace it developed on Earth, then intelligent civilizations could have arisen billions of years before the first dinosaur walked on our world. Billions of years. Consider what humanity has accomplished in just the last 100 years. We went from the Wright brothers' first flight to landing on the moon in just 66 years. We went from the first radio transmission to building a global communications network in less than a century. Now imagine what a civilization could accomplish, not in 100 years, but in 1 million years, in 10 million years, in 1 billion years. Even traveling far below the speed of light, a civilization could colonize the entire galaxy in just a few million years. That sounds like a long time to us, with our brief human lifespans, but it's nothing on cosmic timescales. It's a heartbeat, a blink. The galaxy is only about 100,000 light-years across. A civilization expanding at even 1% of light speed, stopping to establish colonies, building and rebuilding, could touch every star system in the galaxy in just 10 million years. So where are they? Where are the massive structures we call Dyson spheres, hypothetical megastructures built around stars to capture their energy? Where are the radio signals? Where are the probes? Where is any evidence whatsoever that we're not completely, utterly, terrifyingly alone? This is what scientists call the Great Silence, and it is deafening. Since 1960, when astronomer Frank Drake conducted the first systematic search for extraterrestrial radio signals, we have been listening to the cosmos with increasingly sophisticated equipment. We've scanned thousands of star systems. We've monitored billions of radio frequencies. We've analyzed light from distant worlds for signs of industrial pollutants or artificial structures, and we have found nothing. Not a whisper, not a hint. The universe appears to be playing dead. The statistical improbability of our isolation becomes more overwhelming with each passing year of silence. Think of it this way. If intelligent life is common, then the odds of us being the first, the only, the singular conscious species in a galaxy of hundreds of billions of stars is so infinitesimally small that it borders on impossible. It would be like walking into a city of 10 million people and discovering that you are the only person who has ever learned to read. The only one. Ever. In the entire history of that city. And yet, the silence persists. No contact. No signals. No evidence in all our observations of the cosmos that anyone else is out there has ever been out there. Some nights, if you understand the mathematics, if you truly grasp the statistical improbability of our loneliness, you can feel the weight of that silence pressing down like a physical force. Scientists and philosophers have proposed dozens of solutions to the Fermi Paradox, each one more unsettling than the last. Perhaps life is far rarer than we think, and we won the cosmic lottery against unimaginable odds. Perhaps intelligence is a fatal mutation, a trait that invariably leads species to destroy themselves before they can reach the stars. Perhaps there's a great filter somewhere in our future, some inevitable catastrophe that wipes out every civilization that reaches a certain level of technology. Perhaps we're looking in the wrong way, listening for radio signals when advanced civilizations communicate through channels we can't even imagine yet. Or perhaps they're already here. Perhaps they've always been here watching us, studying us, deliberately keeping their distance. This is the zoo hypothesis, first formally articulated by NIT radio astronomer John Ball in 1973, though the idea had haunted thinkers for years before he gave it a name. Ball proposed a disturbing possibility, that extraterrestrial civilizations know about us, have observed us, and have made a collective decision not to interfere with our development. We are, in this scenario, living in a zoo, or perhaps more accurately, a nature preserve. We are the uncontacted tribe, the protected species, the subjects of a grand experiment being conducted by intelligences so far beyond us that we cannot even perceive their presence. The hypothesis suggests that there may be something like a Star Trek Prime Directive operating on a galactic scale, an ethical agreement among spacefaring civilizations that developing species should be left alone to evolve naturally, without interference. They watch, perhaps. They study. They document our wars and our art, our cruelty and our compassion. But they do not reveal themselves. They do not make contact. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. Ball developed his hypothesis partly in response to the growing silence from the stars. If civilizations are common, he reasoned, and if they've had billions of years to develop, then they should be obvious. The fact that they're not obvious suggests they're hiding. And if they're hiding, they must have a reason. The zoo hypothesis provides that reason. They're hiding because they've chosen to hide, because revealing themselves would contaminate the experiment that is humanity. The implications are psychologically devastating if you sit with them long enough. Everything we've ever done, every achievement, every tragedy, every moment of triumph and despair in human history might have been observed by silent witnesses. Our most private moments, our species' darkest hours, the Holocaust, Hiroshima, the slave trade, the Inquisitions, all of it potentially documented by cosmic anthropologists taking notes while maintaining perfect clinical distance. Or perhaps the truth is even stranger. Perhaps they're not deliberately hiding at all. Perhaps we simply lack the capacity to recognize their presence, like an ant colony, unable to comprehend the highway being built overhead. Perhaps their technology, their very existence, operates on principles so foreign to our understanding that we walk through their presence every day without recognizing it. Perhaps what we call dark matter is actually a byproduct of their civilization. Perhaps what we interpret as natural phenomena are actually the background hum of galactic infrastructure so advanced that it's indistinguishable from physics itself. The Fermi Paradox refuses to release its grip on those who truly understand it. It sits at the intersection of mathematics and existential dread, a place where cold probability collides with our deepest fears about our place in the cosmos. Every night we look up at a sky filled with hundreds of billions of stars in our galaxy alone, trillions of galaxies beyond that, and we hear nothing but our own echo bouncing back from the void. We are either precious beyond measure, the only conscious witnesses to creation in all of cosmic history, or we are subjects in a zoo we cannot perceive, animals behind glass being studied by minds that view us the way we view paramecia under a microscope. Neither answer offers much comfort. Both demand that we reconsider everything we think we know about our significance in the universe. And still, the silence continues. Still, we listen to the stars and hear only ourselves. Still, we calculate the probabilities and find that they insist with mathematical certainty that we should not be alone. The numbers don't lie. The universe should be teeming with life, with intelligence, with voices calling out across the darkness. But it isn't. Or at least, if it is, they're choosing not to answer. That choice, if it is a choice, might be the most frightening possibility of all. The night air in Delaware, Ohio held that peculiar stillness that comes just before dawn on a summer morning in 1977. Inside the control room of the Big Ear radio telescope at Ohio State University, the large IBM printer continued its monotonous work, punching out columns of numbers and letters onto continuous feed paper. The machine had been doing this every night for years, recording radio signals from space in alphanumeric code. Most nights, the printouts showed nothing but the expected cosmic background noise, the random static of the universe. The numbers typically ranged from 1 to 9, occasionally reaching into the double digits, when the telescope detected something slightly more energetic than the background hum. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would make anyone stop and stare. Jerry Iman wasn't even at the telescope when it happened. The big ear operated automatically, scanning a patch of sky near the constellation Sagittarius, listening to frequencies where intelligent life might broadcast. The telescope used two feed horns that looked at slightly different portions of the sky, each examining their target area for exactly 72 seconds before the Earth's rotation carried that piece of cosmos out of view. The system was elegant in its simplicity and relentless in its patience, waiting for something that most scientists believed would never come. On August 15, 1977, at approximately 11:23 in the evening Eastern Time, something did come. The signal arrived at 1014.20 megahertz, right in the middle of what astronomers call the water hole, a frequency band between the emission lines of hydrogen and hydroxyl. Scientists had long theorized that this would be the logical place for civilizations to broadcast, a quiet region of the radio spectrum where natural cosmic noise is minimal, like a agreed-upon meeting place in the vast electromagnetic wilderness. The signal was strong, incredibly strong. As it passed through the big ear's receivers, it registered at values that climbed from the usual background of 1s and 2s, all the way up to the letter U on the alphanumeric scale, representing an intensity more than 30 times stronger than the background noise. The sequence printed on the paper read 6 Equator Juliet 5 Bort. This seemingly random collection of characters would become the most famous string of data in the history of the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. But nobody knew it yet. The signal came and went in exactly 72 seconds, precisely the amount of time the telescope's beam width allowed for any celestial source to pass through its field of view. Then it was gone, replaced by the normal background readings of 1s and 2s. The printer continued its mechanical rhythm, unaware it had just recorded something extraordinary. The paper folded accordion style into a growing pile, waiting for someone to review it. Jerry Iman came to examine the printouts a few days later, on August 19. He was a volunteer with the SETI program, one of several people who regularly reviewed the data, looking for anything anomalous. It was tedious work, scanning column after column of low numbers, knowing that the odds of finding anything were astronomically small. His eyes had learned to glaze over the repetitive 1s and 2s, looking for patterns, for anything that stood out. Then he saw it. The sequence, 6 Equator Juliet 5, leaping out from the surrounding noise like a shout in a quiet library. Iman's training told him immediately what he was looking at. The signal showed all the characteristics they had been searching for. It had started weak at the edge of the telescope's beam, grown stronger as the source moved toward the center, peaked, and then declined symmetrically as it passed out of view. This was the exact profile you would expect from a point source in space, not from terrestrial interference or a satellite passing overhead. The frequency was right. The duration was right. The intensity curve was perfect. Iman grabbed a red pen. His hand shaking slightly, he drew a circle around the sequence of characters. In the margin of the printout, he scrawled a single word that would give the signal its name. Wow! That exclamation captured everything. The disbelief, the excitement, the profound significance of what he might be holding in his hands. After years of listening to the cosmos, after thousands of hours of printouts showing nothing but static, here was a signal that matched every theoretical prediction of what a transmission from an intelligent alien civilization would look like. The immediate assumption was that this was the beginning of something. Contact. First contact. The signal would repeat. It had to repeat. No civilization would send just one burst into space. Any deliberate attempt at communication would involve repeated transmissions, perhaps growing more complex as the senders realized someone might be listening. The Big Ear telescope was immediately redirected to the same coordinates in Sagittarius where the signal had originated. They listened. They heard nothing. The following night, they listened again. Silence. They continued listening for days, then weeks. Nothing. The Ohio State team shared their data with other radio telescopes around the world. Everyone pointed their instruments at those same coordinates, that same frequency. Dozens of subsequent observations over the following months and years detected absolutely nothing unusual coming from that location in space. The signal had arrived once, perfectly formed, and then ceased to exist. In the decades since, astronomers have returned to that spot in Sagittarius more than 100 times using increasingly sophisticated equipment. The Very Large Array in New Mexico listened. The Arecibo telescope in Puerto Rico listened before its collapse. In 2012, humanity sent a response back toward that region of space. A collection of Twitter messages and celebrity greetings transmitted at the 35th anniversary of the signal. The cosmos did not answer. The silence is what makes the WOW signal so deeply unsettling. Every conventional explanation struggles against the data. Some suggested it might have been a reflection of Earth-based interference bouncing off space debris, but the frequency was in a protected band where transmissionally prohibited to preserve it for astronomical observation. Others proposed a passing comet releasing hydrogen clouds, but subsequent analysis showed the signal's characteristics didn't match cometary emissions, and no comets were in that position at the time. The most parsimonious explanation remains the one Jerry Iman stumbled upon that August day, an artificial signal from beyond Earth, arriving from the direction of Sagittarius, approximately 220 light-years away based on the most likely stellar candidates in that region. But if it was artificial, if it was from them, why did it never repeat? Perhaps we've been thinking about this wrong. We assume that any signal from an advanced civilization would be intentional, a beacon meant to be found, a lighthouse sweeping across the galaxy inviting contact. We imagine alien astronomers deliberately broadcasting, hoping someone out there is listening. But what if the WOW signal wasn't supposed to happen? Consider the possibility that we witnessed an accident, a mistake, a momentary breach in a protocol that had been carefully maintained for millions of years. Imagine a civilization so advanced that their entire society operates under a strict non-interference directive regarding younger species. They watch us, perhaps they study us, but they never reveal themselves. Their ships, their communications, their very presence is carefully shielded from our primitive instruments. Then, on one August night in 1977, something went wrong. Maybe it was a technical malfunction. Maybe it was a training error by a young operator who accidentally broadcast on an unshielded frequency. Maybe it was a brief instant when their cloaking failed, when their careful invisibility slipped for exactly 72 seconds. Long enough for our crude radio telescope to catch a glimpse of something vast and incomprehensible operating just beyond our ability to detect it. And then they realized their mistake. Somewhere in the depths of space, alarms began to sound. The accidental transmission was detected. Protocols were violated. The breach was sealed immediately, completely, and it would never happen again. The watchers returned to their vigilant silence, their careful observation from behind an invisible curtain we cannot penetrate. This is what some researchers call the zoo hypothesis, a solution to the Fermi Paradox that asks why we haven't detected alien life despite the high probability it should exist. The answer, according to this hypothesis, is that they're already here, or at least watching us, but they've chosen not to make contact. We are the animals in the zoo, living out our lives while beings we cannot comprehend observe from outside the glass. The zookeepers don't speak to the animals. They don't make themselves known. They watch, they record, they study, but they never interfere. If this is true, then the WOW signal takes on a darker meaning. It wasn't a greeting. It wasn't an invitation to join a galactic community. It was a glimpse behind the curtain, a moment when the watchers accidentally revealed themselves, and then immediately, urgently, permanently restored their silence. We're not alone in the universe, but we might be alone in a more profound way, quarantined from the conversation, deemed not ready or not worthy or simply irrelevant to civilizations that learn to transcend the need for contact with younger species. The printout still exists, preserved in the archives of the Ohio History Connection. You can see Jerry Iman's red circle, his excited scrawl in the margin. That single word, wow, represents perhaps the closest humanity has ever come to confirmed contact with another intelligence. And the silence that followed, the absolute absence of any repeat signal across 47 years of listening, might be the most eloquent message we've ever received from the cosmos. They're out there. They heard us hearing them, and they've chosen to say nothing more. November 14th, 2004. The waters off the coast of San Diego. The USS Nimitz carrier strike group was conducting routine training exercises in broad daylight under clear skies. What happened next would become one of the most thoroughly documented, and officially acknowledged encounters between United States military forces and objects that defied every known law of physics. Commander David Fravor, a highly experienced pilot with over 30 years of flight experience, was in the cockpit of his FA-18 Super Hornet when the radio crackled with an unusual request. The USS Princeton, an Aegis-class guided missile cruiser equipped with the most sophisticated radar systems in the world, had been tracking something strange. For 2 weeks, their systems had been detecting objects dropping from above 80,000 feet to just above sea level in less than a second. The radar operators had checked and rechecked their equipment. They'd run diagnostics. Everything was functioning perfectly. Whatever these objects were, they were real. Fravor and his wingman, Commander Jim Slight, were redirected from their training exercise to investigate. As they approached the coordinates provided by the Princeton, Fravor noticed something peculiar on the ocean's surface below. The water was churning and breaking, as if something massive was just beneath the waves. The disturbance was roughly the size of Boeing 737. Then he saw it. Hovering just above the roiling water was an object unlike anything in any military inventory. It was white, oblong, approximately 40 feet in length. Fravor would later describe it as looking like a giant tic-tac mint, smooth with no visible wings, no exhaust, no propulsion system of any kind. There were no seams, no markings, nothing that suggested how it could possibly be staying airborne. It was simply there, motionless against the wind, defying gravity without any apparent effort. Fravor made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He began a descending spiral toward the object, dropping from his altitude of 20,000 feet. As he descended, something happened that still sends chills through anyone who hears the account. The object began to mirror his movements. It started ascending in a circular pattern, as if performing the exact inverse of Fravor's maneuver. The two craft were spiraling toward each other, pilot and unknown object, locked in a perfectly synchronized dance. Then, at approximately 12,000 feet, the object seemed to recognize what Fravor was attempting to do. In Fravor's words, it took off like nothing I've ever seen, but it didn't just accelerate. It didn't gradually build up speed. It simply vanished from its position and reappeared 60 miles away at the Combat Air Patrol Point, the predetermined location where Fravor had been planning to patrol after his training exercise. Let that sink in. This object had somehow known where Fravor was supposed to go next, and it had traveled 60 miles in significantly less than a minute. The Princeton's radar confirmed it. The same object, now at their designated patrol point, as if it had been waiting for them. The implications of this moment are staggering. This wasn't just advanced technology. This suggested either an ability to predict human decision-making, or, more disturbingly, some form of awareness of the pilot's intention. Fravor himself has stated in multiple interviews that it felt like the object was toying with them, demonstrating capabilities so far beyond our own that the encounter was less a meeting of equals and more like a researcher observing laboratory subject. But the Nimitz incident wasn't isolated. Fast forward 11 years to 2015. Another naval encounter, this time involving pilots from the USS Theodore Roosevelt operating off the east coast of the United States. These encounters were more frequent, occurring almost daily for months. The objects appeared on both radar and infrared cameras, performing maneuvers that no known aircraft could survive, let alone execute. One of these encounters produced what is now known as the gimbal footage. The video, captured on the Advanced Targeting Forward-Looking Infrared System, shows an object rotating in mid-flight while maintaining its trajectory. Listen carefully to what that means. This object is spinning on its axis while continuing to fly in a straight line, something that violates our understanding of aerodynamics and propulsion. The audio from the cockpit captures the pilot's reactions. These are not excitable civilians seeing something they can't explain. These are trained military aviators, people who have spent thousands of hours in the air, and their voices carry a mixture of professional curiosity and genuine bewilderment. The object appears to be glowing hot on infrared, suggesting enormous energy output, yet there's no exhaust plume, no heat signature consistent with any known propulsion system. Then it rotates, the entire craft spinning smoothly as the pilots watch and record. One pilot says, quote, "Look at that thing. It's rotating." Their instruments are locked on. The targeting system is functioning perfectly. What they're seeing is real, documented, and completely inexplicable. Both the Nimitz Tic-Tac and the gimbal encounters share characteristics that have emerged as a pattern in military UAP sightings. These objects demonstrate what the Pentagon now officially calls unusual flight characteristics. This bureaucratic language barely captures the reality. We're talking about instantaneous acceleration, from a standstill to hypersonic speeds. We're talking about objects traveling faster than sound, without creating sonic booms. We're talking about what military analysts call transmedium travel, objects moving seamlessly from air to water without any apparent change in performance. Physics as we understand it says these things are impossible. Sonic booms aren't optional. They're the inevitable result of breaking the sound barrier. The shock wave must exist. Yet, multiple witnesses, backed by multiple sensor systems, have observed these objects moving at supersonic speeds in complete silence. The G-forces involved in their instantaneous accelerations should be crushing, enough to turn any biological pilot into liquid. Yet they execute these maneuvers casually, repeatedly, as if inertia simply doesn't apply to them. Even more intriguing is where and when these encounters happen. If you map the locations of credible military UAP sightings over the past several decades, a clear pattern emerges. These objects appear near military installations with striking regularity. They're spotted around naval carrier groups. They hover near Air Force bases. Most significantly, they've been repeatedly observed near nuclear facilities, both weapons storage sites and power plant. The nuclear connection goes back decades. Personnel at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana reported a UFO hovering over their facility in 1967. During that encounter, 10 intercontinental ballistic missiles simultaneously went offline, dropping into a no-go status for no apparent technical reason. After the object departed, the missiles came back online. Similar incidents have been reported at nuclear sites in both the United States and the United Kingdom. Whatever these objects are, they seem particularly interested in our most destructive technology. But here's what makes these encounters truly unsettling. In every documented case, these objects observe without engaging. They watch. They record. They demonstrate their vastly superior capabilities. Then they leave. But there's never communication. No attempts at contact. No messages, no demands, no explanation. They simply watch us at our most dangerous, monitoring our most advanced weapon systems and our most powerful technology, and then they vanish. Think about what that behavior represents. This is classic surveillance methodology. When we study animal populations in the wild, we observe from a distance. We track their behaviors, especially when they're engaged in significant activities like hunting or territorial disputes. We don't announce our presence. We don't try to communicate in ways the animals would understand. We watch, we record, we analyze, and we leave. The parallel is uncomfortable, but unavoidable. Commander Fravor's description of his encounter remains one of the most compelling aspects of the Nimitz incident. He's described the object as appearing to react to his intentions, not just his actions. In military aviation, there's a concept called getting inside your opponent's decision-making cycle. It's about anticipating what they'll do before they do it. But what Fravor describes goes beyond that. The object knew where he was planning to go, moved there ahead of him, and waited. That suggests either technology capable of analyzing and predicting human decision-making in real time, or something even more disturbing, direct awareness of human thought process. These aren't ancient sightings, distorted by time and unreliable memory. This is contemporary, multiple witness, multiple sensor documentation. We have radar data. We have infrared footage. We have testimonies from multiple credible military personnel whose careers and reputations rest on their reliability and judgment. The United States government has officially acknowledged these videos are authentic. The Pentagon has confirmed these encounters involved objects demonstrating flight characteristics that remain unexplained. Yet despite all this evidence, despite official acknowledgement, we're no closer to understanding what these objects are, or who or what controls them. They maintain perfect distance. They demonstrate awareness of our activities. They show interest specifically in our military capabilities and our most powerful weapons. And then they disappear, leaving behind only questions and radar tracks that shouldn't exist. The behavior is deliberate. It's methodical. It's the behavior of something or someone conducting long-term observation. They're not here to invade. They're not here to make contact on our terms. They're here to watch us, to study us, particularly when we're at our most technologically advanced and our most dangerous. They observe us building weapons capable of destroying ourselves. They watch our military exercises and our nuclear arsenals. And they never, not once, offer explanation or make open contact. We are being studied. The evidence suggests we have been for decades. Not by distant observation, through telescopes, but up close, in our airspace, around our most sensitive military installations, documented by our most sophisticated detection systems. And perhaps most disturbing of all, whoever or whatever is conducting this observation possesses technologies so far beyond our own that they can reveal themselves whenever they choose, demonstrate capabilities that mock our understanding of physics, and then vanish without consequence. They watch, they record, and they leave us with the most fundamental question of all. What conclusions are they drawing about us? Now, I pray. In 1953, when James Watson and Francis Crick unveiled the elegant double helix structure of DNA, they believed they had discovered the fundamental blueprint of life itself. The scientific community celebrated this breakthrough as the key to understanding heredity, evolution, and the very nature of what makes us human. Yet decades later, as geneticists began mapping the human genome with unprecedented precision, they stumbled upon anomalies that would challenge everything we thought we knew about our own origins. The mystery begins with what paleontologists have long called the missing link, that elusive transitional fossil between our primate ancestors and modern Homo sapiens. For over a century, scientists have searched for clear evidence of gradual evolution, expecting to find a smooth progression of changes that would explain how we transformed from tree-dwelling apes into beings capable of creating art, music, mathematics, and civilization. Instead, what the fossil record reveals is something far more puzzling. The archaeological evidence shows that for millions of years, human ancestors changed very slowly, developing incrementally over vast stretches of time. Then, approximately 200,000 years ago, something extraordinary happened. The human brain, which had remained relatively stable in size and complexity for countless generations, suddenly began to expand at a rate that defies conventional evolutionary theory. In what amounts to an evolutionary eye blink, our cranial capacity nearly tripled. Our vocal apparatus restructured itself to allow for complex speech. Our hands developed the fine motor control necessary for tool creation and artistic expression. Most remarkably, our cognitive abilities exploded into abstract thinking, future planning, and self-awareness. This transformation occurred so rapidly that it has left evolutionary biologists struggling to explain the mechanism behind such dramatic change. But the mystery deepens when we examine the genetic evidence itself. In 2013, a team of geneticists published findings that sent shockwaves through the scientific community. While mapping the human genome and comparing it to the genetic sequences of our closest primate relatives, they identified 223 genes present in human DNA that have no predecessors in the primate evolutionary tree. These genes did not gradually develop through the slow process of mutation and natural selection that Darwin described. They simply appear in the human genome, fully formed, with no apparent ancestral lineage. These are not minor genetic variations or simple mutations. These genes govern critical aspects of human development, including brain function, neural complexity, and the very characteristics that separate us from every other species on Earth. According to standard evolutionary theory, such genes should have precursors, earlier versions that show a progression of development. Yet these 223 genes seem to have emerged from nowhere, inserted into our genetic code without the millions of years of gradual change that should accompany such fundamental modifications. Some geneticists have proposed horizontal gene transfer, a process where genetic material jumps between species, as a possible explanation. While this phenomenon does occur in bacteria and other simple organisms, it is exceedingly rare in complex life forms, and has never been documented on this scale in mammals. Others have suggested that perhaps these genes existed in ancient common ancestors, but were lost in other primate lineages. Yet, this explanation requires accepting an extraordinary number of coordinated genetic losses across multiple species, while those same genes were perfectly preserved in the human line, a statistical improbability that strains credibility. The question that haunts the edges of mainstream scientific discussion is whether these genetic anomalies might point toward something more unsettling. What if human evolution was not entirely natural? What if our rapid cognitive development was not simply a fortunate accident of nature? To understand why this question has gained traction in certain research communities, we must examine a parallel pattern of evidence that has emerged over the past 6 decades, a pattern involving human encounters with non-human intelligence and a disturbing focus on human reproduction. On the night of September 19, 1961, Betty and Barney Hill were driving home to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, after a vacation in Canada. As they traveled along Route 3 through the White Mountains, they noticed a bright light in the sky that seemed to be following their car. What began as curious observation turned to anxiety as the light descended and revealed itself to be a structured craft of unknown origin. Barney stopped the car and stepped out with binoculars, later describing a disc-shaped object with rows of windows and figures moving inside. Terrified, the Hills fled in their vehicle, but soon experienced a strange electronic beeping sound and felt an inexplicable drowsiness overtaking them. When they arrived home, they realized that the trip had taken 2 hours longer than it should have. They had no memory of what occurred during that missing time, only a sense of profound unease and fragmented images that haunted their dreams. In the months that followed, both Betty and Barney developed anxiety and psychological distress. Barney discovered a mysterious circle of warts on his groin that appeared overnight. Betty's dreams grew increasingly vivid and disturbing, filled with images of medical examination rooms and strange beings conducting procedures on her body. Eventually, the couple sought help from Dr. Benjamin Simon, a respected Boston psychiatrist who specialized in hypnotherapy. Under separate hypnotic regression sessions conducted over several months, both Betty and Barney recalled remarkably consistent accounts of being taken aboard the craft. They described being separated and subjected to medical examinations by beings with large heads and dark, wraparound eyes. The procedures focused intensely on their reproductive systems. Barney recalled a device being used to collect a sperm sample. Betty described a long needle being inserted into her abdomen, which the beings explained was a pregnancy test, though the procedure was unlike any known medical technique of that era. What makes the Hill case particularly significant is not just its chronological position as the first widely publicized abduction account, but the specific details that would later emerge as consistent patterns in hundreds of similar reports. The beings showed particular interest in human genetics and reproduction. They collected biological samples. They performed procedures that suggested a deep knowledge of human physiology, combined with technology far beyond our own. And they appeared to be conducting these examinations with systematic precision, as if following a protocol. For years, the Hill case remained an isolated anomaly, easily dismissed as an unusual psychological episode. But as decades passed, reports sharing strikingly similar elements began accumulating. People from different countries, different cultures, different backgrounds, with no knowledge of each other's experiences, described nearly identical encounters involving medical examination and reproductive procedures. Dr. John Mack, a Pulitzer Prize-winning author and professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, spent years investigating these reports with scientific rigor. Mack's credentials were impeccable, his reputation beyond reproach. When he began researching abduction accounts in the early 1990s, he expected to find evidence of psychological pathology or false memories. Instead, he encountered something that challenged his fundamental assumptions about reality. Mack interviewed over 200 individuals who reported abduction experiences. He subjected them to psychological evaluation, searching for signs of mental illness, fantasy proneness, or suggestibility. What he found were psychologically healthy individuals, often highly educated and professionally successful, who were deeply disturbed by experiences they could not explain or dismiss. These were not people seeking attention or fame. Many were terrified that sharing their experiences would destroy their careers, and reputations. The consistency of their accounts was what troubled Mack most deeply. Again and again, his subjects described being taken to strange environments where beings conducted medical procedures focusing on their reproductive system. Women reported egg harvesting procedures. Men described sperm collection. Some female subjects recalled being shown hybrid children that appeared partly human and partly something else, with beings suggesting these were their offspring. Mack documented cases where women experienced false pregnancies that medical tests confirmed, only to have the pregnancies mysteriously vanish weeks later, with no miscarriage, no physical evidence, just an empty womb where life had been developing. He recorded accounts of people who had never met but described identical examination rooms, identical instruments, identical procedures performed by identical beings. As a scientist, Mack struggled with the implications. He could not prove the objective reality of these experiences, yet he could not dismiss them as mere fantasy or delusion. The psychological impact on his subjects was profound and real. The details were too specific and too consistent across too many independent accounts to attribute solely to imagination or cultural contamination. What emerged from Mack's research was a disturbing possibility. If even a fraction of these accounts reflected genuine experiences, they suggested a long-term, systematic program of genetic study and manipulation involving the human species. The pattern indicated not random encounters, but coordinated efforts to access human reproductive material, to create hybrid offspring, to monitor and perhaps guide human genetic development. This brings us to an unsettling parallel with a concept well understood by conservation biologists and zookeepers around the world. When we maintain populations of endangered species in captivity, observation alone is never sufficient. Modern zoos do not simply watch animals, they actively manage their genetics. They maintain stud books tracking bloodlines. They coordinate breeding programs across institutions to ensure genetic diversity. They collect and preserve reproductive material. They perform regular health examinations and take biological samples. They intervene to prevent inbreeding and maintain healthy populations. The question that cannot be easily dismissed is this: if Earth is indeed an observed world, a preserve monitored by advanced intelligences as the zoo hypothesis suggests, would observation alone be sufficient? Or would such stewardship necessarily include genetic management? Consider what responsible zookeeping requires. You cannot simply leave populations to their own devices and hope for the best. Genetic drift, inbreeding depression, and random mutations can doom isolated populations to extinction or degradation. Careful intervention becomes not just beneficial, but necessary for long-term survival. The evidence from human abduction accounts, viewed through this lens, takes on a chilling coherence. The focus on reproduction, the collection of genetic material, the creation of hybrid offspring, the long-term monitoring of specific family lines across generations. These are precisely the activities we would expect from beings managing a genetic program, ensuring the health and perhaps guiding the development of a species they consider valuable enough to preserve. The genetic anomalies in human DNA, those 223 genes with no evolutionary precursors, align disturbingly well with this possibility. What if they were not products of natural selection at all? What if our rapid cognitive development was not accidental but guided? What if the missing link in human evolution is missing because the transition was not entirely natural? This does not require accepting ancient astronaut theories or dismissing conventional evolution entirely. Perhaps our development was mostly natural, with occasional interventions at critical junctures. Perhaps those mysterious genes were inserted at specific points to nudge our evolution in desired directions, the way conservationists might introduce genetic diversity into struggling populations. The implications extend beyond our past into our present and future. If such a program exists, it may still be ongoing. The continuing reports of abduction experiences, the persistent patterns of reproductive procedures, suggest that whatever interest non-human intelligence has in human genetics has not diminished. We may be living inside a managed preserve, our genetic future shaped by intelligences whose motives and methods remain opaque to us. This possibility forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about autonomy and purpose. Are we truly the masters of our own evolutionary destiny, Or are we specimens in an experiment we cannot fully perceive? The evidence does not provide definitive answers, but it accumulates in ways that resist easy dismissal, challenging us to expand our understanding of what it might mean to be human in a cosmos far stranger than we have dared to imagine. In the Bay of Bengal, off the coast of India, lies a small island called North Sentinel. It appears on maps as a tiny speck of green, surrounded by azure waters and coral reefs. But approach too closely, and you'll be met with a hail of arrows. The Sentinelese people who inhabit this island have violently rejected every attempt at contact for as long as recorded history remembers. They kill outsiders. They attack helicopters. They want nothing to do with our world. And yet, the Indian government has made an extraordinary decision. They protect the Sentinelese from us. A 30-mile exclusion zone surrounds North Sentinel Island. The Indian Navy patrols these waters, but not to contain the islanders. They're keeping us out. In 2006, 2 fishermen drifted too close while intoxicated and fell asleep in their boat. The Sentinelese killed them. Indian authorities didn't retaliate. They didn't invade. They didn't even attempt to recover the bodies. Instead, they reinforced the exclusion zone. The message was clear. These people have a right to be left alone, regardless of the consequences. This isn't sentimentality. It's policy. It's protocol. It's based on centuries of evidence showing that contact with technologically advanced civilizations destroys less developed ones, even when the advanced civilization means well. Especially when they mean well. The diseases alone can be genocidal. When missionary John Allen Chau illegally traveled to North Sentinel Island in 2018, he wasn't just risking his own life. He was potentially carrying pathogens that could have wiped out the entire population. People with no immunity to common viruses that circulate in our cities every winter. Chau was killed on the beach. His body never recovered. And once again, India did not respond with force. They arrested the fishermen who transported him, yes, but they made no attempt to punish the Sentinelese. The policy of non-interference held firm. These people, living essentially in the Stone Age, using technology unchanged for thousands of years, are protected from us by one of the world's largest democracies. Protected from our health. Protected from our diseases. Protected from our civilization itself. This isn't an isolated case. Throughout the world, particularly in the Amazon basin, numerous uncontacted tribes exist under similar protective protocols. Brazil's National Indian Foundation, known as FUNAI, maintains a policy of no contact with these groups. They monitor them from a distance, using aerial surveys and remote sensors. Anthropologists have photographs of these tribes, crystal clear images taken from aircraft showing people who have never seen the modern world, who don't know that cities exist, that humans have walked on the moon, that billions of us live completely different lives just beyond their forest home. The anthropologists know where they are. They watch them. They study them. But they never reveal themselves. Never make contact. The policy explicitly states that contact should only occur if initiated by the tribe itself, and even then, only after extensive preparation and with full understanding of the potentially catastrophic consequences. These aren't primitive people being kept in a zoo. This is recognition of a profound ethical truth, that contact between civilizations at vastly different technological levels is inherently dangerous to the less developed one, regardless of intention. Jane Goodall understood this when she began studying chimpanzees in Gombe National Park in 1960. Her methodology was revolutionary precisely because of its passivity. She didn't capture the chimps. She didn't experiment on them. She didn't try to tame them or teach them or help them in any way. She simply observed. For months, she sat at a distance while the chimpanzees went about their lives, slowly growing accustomed to her presence. She let them decide when to approach. She let them set the terms of interaction. Even then, Goodall later acknowledged that her presence changed them. The bananas she provided to encourage close observation altered their behavior, created conflicts within the group, affected their natural patterns. No matter how careful you are, observation changes what you observe. Contact, even passive contact, has consequences. And if this is true for beings who share 98.8% of our DNA, How much more true must it be for beings at completely different levels of cognitive and technological development? We practice these non-interference protocols not out of cruelty, but out of hard-won wisdom. We've learned, through countless tragic examples, what happens when technologically advanced societies contact isolated ones. The historical record is unambiguous. First comes disease, often wiping out 50 to 90% of the population before any other form of contact even begins. Then comes cultural collapse, as the contacted group's entire worldview, their understanding of reality itself, proves inadequate to explain what they're experiencing. Their religions, their social structures, their sense of meaning and purpose, all of it can disintegrate within a single generation. The Americas provide the most devastating case study. Conservative estimates suggest that 90% of indigenous populations died following European contact, most from diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza. But the death toll extends beyond biology. Cultures that had existed for thousands of years vanished. Languages disappeared. Entire ways of understanding the world were lost forever. And this happened even when Europeans weren't actively trying to commit genocide. The contact itself was the weapon. The technological and biological gap was simply too vast for both civilizations to survive interaction intact. So we've developed protocols. We've created exclusion zones. We've made it illegal to contact certain groups. We've built an entire ethical framework around the principle that beings at different developmental stages should be protected from each other, especially the less developed from the more advanced. We enforce these rules even when the isolated groups kill our people, even when we could easily overpower them, even when we genuinely believe we could help them. Now, consider this. If we, as a species barely past nuclear weapons and primitive spaceflight, have developed these sophisticated, non-interference protocols for beings only slightly less advanced than ourselves, what protocols might exist at the galactic level? Carl Sagan explored this possibility extensively in his writings. The renowned astrophysicist and science communicator suggested that any civilization capable of interstellar travel would necessarily be so far advanced beyond us that they would view us the way we view uncontacted tribes, not as equals to engage with, but as developing civilizations to be observed from a distance, protected from contact that could prove catastrophic to our social and psychological development. Sagan proposed what's sometimes called the zoo hypothesis, though he preferred more nuanced terms. The idea is simple but profound. Earth might be designated as a kind of nature preserve, a place where a primitive civilization is allowed to develop without interference. Advanced aliens might have extensive observation posts, might study us in detail, might watch our television broadcasts, and monitor our internet traffic, but they don't reveal themselves. Just as anthropologists photograph uncontacted tribes from aircraft but never land, never make their presence known, never disrupt the natural development of the culture they're studying. The implications are chilling when you think them through. We might be surrounded by civilizations millions of years more advanced than us. Civilizations with technology so sophisticated it would appear magical to our understanding. Civilizations that watch us the way we watch the Sentinelese. They know we're here. They observe us. They've cataloged our languages, our wars, our art, our suffering. But they don't intervene. Not because they're cruel, but because they've learned, perhaps through bitter experience spanning millennia, that contact between civilizations at vastly different developmental stages causes more harm than good. Consider what this means for our search for extraterrestrial intelligence. We've been scanning the skies for radio signals for decades. We've sent messages into space. We've assumed that if advanced aliens exist, they would want to talk to us, that communication would be desirable and beneficial. But what if we're wrong? What if advanced civilizations have protocols specifically prohibiting contact with species at our developmental level? What if they're out there listening to everything we broadcast, but deliberately not responding because they've determined we're not ready? We're at the uncontacted tribe stage of cosmic civilization. We've barely left our planet. We still kill each other over resources and ideology. Our technology is powerful enough to destroy ourselves, but not sophisticated enough to save ourselves from our own weapons. We have nuclear bombs, but not fusion power. We have social media, but not social cohesion. We're in that dangerous adolescent phase of civilization where we're powerful enough to be a threat, but not wise enough to handle that power responsibly. Any truly advanced civilization would recognize this. They would see us the way we see North Sentinel Island, a place where people live by rules and understandings fundamentally incompatible with the wider world, where contact could trigger collapse, where the kindest thing to do is maintain distance. The exclusion zone around Earth might not be 30 miles of ocean. It might be light years of space, and the beings enforcing it might not be the Indian Navy. They might be something far more advanced, far more patient, far more committed to letting us develop on our own timeline, no matter how long that takes. The protection goes both ways, of course. Just as the Sentinelese must be protected from our diseases, perhaps we must be protected from knowledge and technology we're not ready to handle. Imagine handing nuclear weapons to a Stone Age tribe. Imagine giving them smartphones and social media and industrial agriculture all at once. The result wouldn't be uplift. It would be chaos, cultural destruction, psychological collapse, maybe even extinction. Perhaps advanced aliens have run this experiment before. Perhaps they've tried contact with developing civilizations and watched those civilizations tear themselves apart trying to integrate knowledge and technology they hadn't earned through their own development. Perhaps the non-interference protocol exists because it's the only approach that actually works, the only way to give developing civilizations a chance to survive their own growth. We might never know they're there until we're ready. Until we've solved our own problems, unified our species, developed the psychological and social maturity to encounter the truly alien without falling apart. The exclusion zone might only lift when we've proven we can handle what lies beyond it. And until then, they watch. They wait. They protect us from ourselves by protecting us from them. The most profound form of contact might be the contact that never happens, the observation that remains invisible, the help that looks exactly like being left alone. There's a question that keeps physicists awake at night, one that feels like it belongs in science fiction, but has grown increasingly difficult to dismiss. What if everything we know, everything we've ever experienced, every star in the sky and every atom in our bodies, is nothing more than code running in someone else's computer? The simulation hypothesis isn't new, but what makes it genuinely unsettling is how well it fits with what we're discovering about the universe itself. When Nick Bostrom, a philosopher at Oxford University, published his groundbreaking paper in 2003, he presented a logical argument that still haunts the scientific community. His reasoning was elegantly simple and deeply disturbing. If any civilization reaches the technological capability to run detailed simulations of conscious beings, and if they have any interest in studying their ancestors, the number of simulated realities would vastly outnumber the one base reality. The math becomes unavoidable. Statistically speaking, we're almost certainly living in a simulation. But Bostrom's philosophical framework remained just that, philosophy, until physicists started noticing something strange about the universe itself. The way reality behaves at its most fundamental levels doesn't look natural. It looks programmed. Consider quantum mechanics, the bizarre rule set that governs reality at its smallest scales. Particles don't have definite positions until they're observed. They exist in multiple states simultaneously, collapsing into a single state only when measured. This sounds exactly like a computer program conserving processing power. Why render something that nobody's looking at? Video games use this exact technique. The detailed graphics only load in your immediate vicinity. Everything else exists in a simplified state until you turn to look at it. The universe appears to follow the same principle. Then there's the mathematical nature of physics itself. The universe doesn't just follow mathematical rules. It seems to be made of mathematics. Every physical law we've discovered can be expressed as an equation, from gravity to electromagnetism to the strong nuclear force. This isn't just convenient for scientists trying to understand reality. It suggests that mathematics isn't something we invented to describe the universe, but rather the actual programming language of existence itself. The universe computes. Even the speed of light starts to look suspicious under this lens. 300 million meters per second. Constant and unchanging. An absolute cosmic speed limit that nothing can exceed. We've always framed this as a fundamental property of spacetime, but what if it's actually a processing limitation? Information can only propagate through the simulation at a certain maximum rate. The speed of light isn't a feature of reality. It's a bandwidth restriction. But the real evidence gets stranger still, and far more specific. In 2017, physicists confirmed something called the GZK cutoff. Cosmic rays, the high-energy particles that bombard Earth from deep space, hit a maximum energy threshold that they simply cannot exceed. No matter how violent the cosmic event that created them, no matter how much energy should theoretically be possible, these particles never surpass approximately 57 billion electron volt. They hit a wall, an absolute ceiling of energy that shouldn't exist in a natural continuous universe. Unless the universe isn't continuous. Unless it's discrete, pixelated, like a computer screen that can only display a finite number of values. In a simulation, there would necessarily be a maximum energy level determined by the processing power allocated to the program. You can't have infinite energy in a finite computational system. The GZK cutoff looks exactly like what we'd expect to find if reality were rendered at a specific resolution with specific limitations. James Gates, a physicist at the University of Maryland, made an even more startling discovery while working with the equations of supersymmetry and string theory. Buried deep within the mathematical framework that might describe the fundamental nature of reality, he found something that shouldn't be there. Error-correcting codes. The same type of codes that computer scientists use to detect and fix errors in data transmission. Block linear self-dual error-correcting codes, to be precise. These aren't vague similarities or metaphorical connections. They're literally identical to the codes that browsers use to correct errors when you're loading a web page. Think about what that means. The mathematical language of the universe contains embedded instructions for error correction. Why would reality need error correction unless it's being computed? Unless there's a possibility of errors creeping in that need to be detected and fixed. This isn't philosophy anymore. This is mathematics suggesting that the universe is a computational process. Now, connect these discoveries to the zoo hypothesis, that disturbing explanation for the great silence of the cosmos. The zoo hypothesis proposes that alien civilizations know we're here, but deliberately avoid contact, observing us like specimens in a controlled environment. For years, this seemed like an interesting, but ultimately unprovable idea. But if we're living in a simulation, the zoo hypothesis transforms from speculation into inevitability. If this is a simulation, we're not just being watched occasionally. Observation is the entire point of our existence. We are the experiment. Everything that happens, every human achievement and tragedy, every thought you've ever had, exists to generate data for whoever or whatever is running the program. The zoo isn't a metaphor. It's a literal description of our containment. This explains the Fermi Paradox in the most unsettling way possible. We don't see evidence of alien civilizations because they're not rendered unless the simulation requires them. Or perhaps more disturbingly, any advanced aliens that exist within the simulation already know the truth. They've discovered the evidence we're only beginning to find. They know we're in a zoo, and they know that attempting contact with us might interfere with the experimental parameters. They stay silent not out of respect for our development, but because they understand the rules of the reality they inhabit. Or here's an even darker possibility. The advanced aliens aren't fellow prisoners in the simulation. They're the ones running it. Every UFO sighting, every strange aerial phenomena, every alleged alien encounter could be the equivalent of a scientist opening the terrarium to adjust the experiment. They're not visitors from another star system. They're administrators checking on their simulation, making sure the parameters are holding, collecting their data. The implications spiral outward into genuinely disturbing territory. If we're in a simulation designed to study something specific about human consciousness or civilization, then free will becomes questionable at best. Are we making genuine choices, or are we executing code, following programmed responses to stimuli? When you decided to listen to this, was that decision yours, or was it a predetermined outcome based on your programming? Some researchers have proposed ways to test the simulation hypothesis. We could look for glitches in the matrix, moments when the rendering fails or the physics engine hiccups. We could search for the edges of the simulation, boundaries beyond which the program doesn't bother rendering reality in detail. We could even try to hack the simulation, to find exploits in the code that would allow us to manipulate reality in ways that shouldn't be possible. But here's what nobody wants to say out loud. If we're in a simulation sophisticated enough to render billions of years of apparent history, billions of galaxies, quantum mechanics, and conscious observers, then it's sophisticated enough to hide itself from its own inhabitants. Any test we design would be anticipated. Any glitch we find might be intentional, part of the experimental design. We could be specifically programmed to search for evidence of the simulation, our search itself generating valuable data about how simulated consciousnesses respond to existential uncertainty. The most terrifying aspect isn't the possibility that we're in a simulation. It's the realization that if we are, there's no way out and no way to prove it definitively. We're stuck inside the experiment, simultaneously the observers and the observed, generating data for purposes we can't understand, running on hardware we can't access, for entities we can't comprehend. Every person you've ever loved might be a subroutine. Every choice you've made might have been scripted. Every moment of your life might exist solely to answer a question you'll never know was asked. The universe might have error-correcting codes in its foundations, because it's debugging itself as it runs. Cosmic rays might hit maximum energy levels because that's the resolution limit of the simulation. Quantum mechanics might look bizarre because we're seeing the underlying computational mechanics that usually stay hidden. And if the zoo hypothesis is correct, if we're being deliberately isolated and observed, then the simulation isn't passive. It's curated. The experiment is ongoing, and we're living inside its parameters, generation after generation, producing whatever data justifies our existence. The silence of the cosmos isn't a mystery. It's a feature. The observation is complete, total, and eternal. We don't just live in a zoo. We are the zoo, coded into existence, running our programming, fulfilling our function as experimental subjects in someone else's incomprehensible research project. And that might be the only purpose we've ever had. Something changed in 2017. After decades of official silence, dismissals, and ridicule, the United States government began to speak about UFOs differently. The veil of secrecy that had held firm since Project Blue Book closed in 1969 started to lift, and what emerged from beneath it was more disturbing than anyone had anticipated. In December of 2017, the New York Times published a revelation that would fracture the wall of government denial. The Pentagon had been running a secret program called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, known simply as ADIPT, for years, from 2007 to 2012 officially. Though evidence suggests it continued beyond that date, the Department of Defense had been investigating unidentified aerial phenomena. They had been tracking objects that violated our understanding of physics, and they had been doing it with taxpayer money while telling the public that no such program existed. The program was revealed by Luis Elizondo, a career intelligence officer who had run ADIPT. When he resigned in October 2017, he didn't fade quietly into retirement. He went public, and he brought evidence with him. The Pentagon couldn't deny it anymore. They confirmed the program's existence. They released videos. 3 of them became known simply as FLAR-1 Gimbal and Go Fast. Infrared footage captured by Navy fighter pilots showing objects moving in ways that defied explanation. Objects with no visible means of propulsion rotating against hurricane-force winds. Objects accelerating instantaneously to hypersonic speeds. Objects dropping from 80,000 feet to just above sea level in less than a second. Commander David Fravor, a decorated fighter pilot with 18 years of experience, described his encounter with one of these objects off the coast of San Diego in 2004. The Princeton, a Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser, had been tracking these objects for weeks on their advanced Spy-1 radar system. They appeared at 80,000 feet, then dropped to 20,000 feet in less than a second. When Fravor and his squadron were vectored to investigate, he saw something that still haunts him. A white tack-shaped object, 40 feet long, with no wings, no exhaust, no visible means of propulsion, hovering above the ocean. When he tried to intercept it, the object mirrored his movements. Then, accelerated, and vanished. Seconds later, the Princeton detected it 60 miles away. It had traveled 60 miles in less time than Fravor could process what had happened. To do that, the object would have needed to accelerate at forces that would turn any known material into powder. The Navy pilots weren't fringe witnesses. These were Top Gun graduates, weapons systems officers, radar operators on Aegis-equipped warships. These were people trained to identify aircraft, trained to remain calm under pressure, trained to trust their instruments, and their instruments were telling them something impossible was in their airspace. In August 2020, the Pentagon made it official. They established the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force under the Office of Naval Intelligence. The mission was to detect, analyze, and catalog UAPs that could potentially pose a threat to United States national security. The language was careful, bureaucratic, but the message was clear. The military was taking this seriously now. They weren't laughing anymore. Then came June 2021, and the preliminary assessment that changed everything. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence released an unclassified report to Congress detailing 144 encounters between military personnel and unidentified aerial phenomena between November 2004 and March 2024. 144 incidents that the United States government, with all its technology and intelligence capabilities, could not explain. Of those 144, they could only explain one. It was a deflating balloon. The other 143 remained completely unexplained. The report was only 9 pages in its unclassified form, but those 9 pages represented a seismic shift. The government admitted that these objects were real, that they were physical, that they were in restricted airspace, and that they had no idea what they were. 18 of the incidents involved objects that appeared to demonstrate advanced technology, remaining stationary in winds aloft, moving against the wind, maneuvering abruptly, or moving at considerable speed without discernible means of propulsion. The report acknowledged that some of these encounters could represent technologies deployed by China or Russia, but it also left the door open to something else. Something the report danced around but never quite named. On May 17, 2022, something happened that would have seemed impossible just 5 years earlier. The House Intelligence Subcommittee on Counterterrorism, Counterintelligence, and Counterproliferation held a public hearing on unidentified aerial phenomena. It was the first open congressional hearing on UFOs in 50 years, since the Condon Committee shut down Project Blue Book and declared the subject unworthy of scientific study. But here they were again, members of Congress listening to testimony from Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence Scott Bray and Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security Ronald Moultrie. Under oath, these officials confirmed that the military continues to encounter these objects regularly. Bray showed videos that had never been seen publicly. One showed a spherical object passing by a military aircraft. He couldn't explain what it was. He couldn't explain how it flew. He could only confirm that it was real. It was in restricted airspace, and they had no idea what it was. The hearing was careful, measured, but between the bureaucratic language, a troubling picture emerged. These encounters are not rare. They are not decreasing. They are becoming more frequent. But the most disturbing pattern wasn't revealed in that public hearing. It came from witnesses, from former military personnel, from leaked documents, and whispered conversations. These objects, whatever they are, show a consistent and unnerving interest in humanity's nuclear capabilities. They appear at nuclear weapons facilities. They appear during weapons tests. They appear near nuclear-powered aircraft carriers and submarines. The pattern is undeniable and deeply unsettling. The Malmstrom Air Force Base incident of March 1967 remains one of the most chilling examples. Malmstrom housed Minuteman nuclear intercontinental ballistic missiles in underground silos scattered across Montana. On March 24th, multiple security personnel reported seeing a glowing red object hovering above the facility. At the same moment, 10 nuclear missiles in their silos went offline. Not gradually, not one at a time, simultaneously. Each missile was in its own independent system, with multiple redundancies, designed to never fail. They all failed at once. Captain Robert Salas was the officer on duty in the underground launch control facility that night. He received frantic calls from topside security reporting the object. Then, One by one, his missiles showed a no-go status. These were the most advanced weapons systems in the American arsenal, capable of reaching Moscow in 30 minutes, and they were being shut down by something he couldn't see from his underground post. When he finally went topside, the object was gone. The missiles came back online. No explanation was ever provided. The Air Force investigated and found no mechanical failure, no electrical fault, no human error. The missiles had simply been turned off. Salas wasn't alone. Robert Jameson, another officer at Malmstrom, reported an identical incident at a different launch facility around the same time. Former Air Force personnel from bases around the world have come forward with similar accounts. Objects appearing above nuclear facilities in England, Russia, Ukraine, always watching, sometimes interfering, never attacking, but making their presence known. In 2010, 7 Air Force officers held a press conference at the National Press Club in Washington. They had served at nuclear bases around the world. They testified that UFOs had appeared at these facilities repeatedly over decades. They described objects hovering over missile silos, objects that caused electronic systems to malfunction, objects that seemed to be monitoring humanity's most destructive weapons. Captain Bruce Fenstermacher, former ICBM launch officer, stated plainly that he believed these objects were demonstrating their capability to disable nuclear weapons. Not as an attack, but as a message. The pattern extends to weapons testing. In 1964, during a test launch of a dummy nuclear warhead at Vandenberg Air Force Base, Lieutenant Robert Jacobs was filming the missile with a telescopic camera. The footage showed something extraordinary. A disc-shaped object appeared in frame, flew around the warhead, appeared to shoot beams of light at it from multiple points, and then flew away. The warhead, which had been functioning perfectly, tumbled out of space and crashed into the Pacific Ocean. Jacobs showed the film to his superiors. 2 men in gray suits arrived, confiscated the film, and told him never to speak of it. He stayed silent for decades. When he finally went public, other personnel from that base corroborated his account. Whatever these objects are, they seem particularly interested in our capacity for nuclear destruction. Some researchers see this as protective, a galactic intervention to prevent us from destroying ourselves. Others see it as more ominous. Perhaps they're ensuring we don't develop weapons that could threaten them. Perhaps they're studying how we handle the ultimate destructive power. Or perhaps they're simply monitoring a species that has proven itself capable of contemplating its own extinction. The activity isn't slowing down. It's accelerating. The establishment of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office in July 2022, replacing the UAP Task Force, came with an expanded mandate. They're not just investigating aerial phenomena anymore. They're looking at objects underwater, objects in space, objects that move seamlessly between domains in ways our technology cannot. The military is reporting encounters almost daily now in some areas. Training ranges off the east and west coasts have become hotspots where pilots encounter these objects regularly. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson, a former senator and astronaut, stated in October 2021 that he had received classified briefings on the UAP phenomenon. He said he had talked to Navy pilots who had encountered these objects and that their accounts were consistent and credible. He called for serious scientific investigation and didn't rule out the possibility that some of these objects might be extraterrestrial. When the administrator of NASA suggests we might not be alone, the ground beneath our understanding shifts. At Harvard, Professor Avi Loeb launched the Galileo Project in July 2021, a serious scientific effort to search for evidence of extraterrestrial technological civilizations. Loeb, chair of Harvard's astronomy department, made the radical suggestion that we should treat UAPs as potential evidence of alien technology and study them with the same rigor we apply to any other scientific question. He's building a network of sensors to detect and analyze anomalous objects. He's bringing academic credibility to a subject that was career suicide just a decade ago. The data keeps accumulating. The encounters keep happening. The government keeps acknowledging more and more. We are living through a slow-motion revelation, a gradual disclosure that something is in our skies, in our oceans, near our weapons, and we don't know what it is. More importantly, we don't know what it wants. The terrifying implication isn't just that we're being watched. We've been watched for decades, perhaps longer. The terrifying implication is that the watching is intensifying. The frequency of encounters is increasing. The proximity is getting closer. Whatever has been observing us from a distance is moving closer, appearing more often, making its presence harder to ignore. We might be approaching a threshold, a moment of transition. Perhaps we're about to graduate from the zoo to be welcomed into some galactic community we didn't know existed. Or perhaps something darker. Perhaps we've become too dangerous, too unstable, too close to destroying ourselves or threatening others. Perhaps the surveillance is increasing because we're approaching a point where we can no longer be left unsupervised. Perhaps the intervention at nuclear facilities isn't protection, but containment. Perhaps we're being watched more intently because we're being evaluated, and the results of that evaluation will determine our future in ways we cannot yet imagine. The objects are still there, still watching, still waiting, and the watching is no longer from a comfortable distance. It's getting closer, and no one in power will tell us why. We've walked together through the evidence, examined the patterns, considered the silences. We've traced the anomalies in our skies, measured the gaps in our communications, analyzed the peculiar consistency of our cosmic isolation. And now we arrive at the most unsettling realization of all. We may never truly know if we're being observed, because that's precisely how a zoo is designed to function. The animals in a terrestrial zoo don't recognize the one-way glass. They don't understand the cameras hidden in artificial rocks, don't perceive the observers taking notes from carefully concealed positions. They live their lives, engaging in their natural behaviors, completely unaware that every significant moment is being cataloged, studied, and preserved. If the zoo hypothesis is correct, we exist in exactly this state. Our entire civilization might be the exhibition, and we are simply too limited in our perception to recognize the enclosure. Consider what we've presented throughout this exploration. The patterns of unexplained aerial phenomena that appear, demonstrate impossible capabilities, and vanish without explanation. The deafening silence from the cosmos, despite our increasingly sophisticated efforts to detect even the faintest whisper of artificial signals. The mathematical improbability of our solitude in a universe containing hundreds of billions of galaxies, each filled with hundreds of billions of stars. The curious way that these phenomena seem to increase in frequency and sophistication precisely as our own technology advances, as though adjusting to remain just beyond our ability to definitively capture or analyze. Each piece of evidence points towards something vast and intentional, yet definitive proof remains perpetually just beyond our grasp, like a mirage that retreats as we approach. Perhaps this too is part of the design. The most disturbing questions are the ones we cannot answer. Are they waiting for us to reach a certain technological threshold before making contact? Do we need to demonstrate some level of maturity, some proof that we can handle the knowledge of our place in the cosmic hierarchy? Or will contact never come, regardless of how advanced we become? Maybe observation is the entire purpose, and interaction would corrupt the very experiment they're conducting. Are we one of thousands of observed worlds scattered throughout the galaxy, each sealed in its own invisible enclosure? Or are we something special, something unique that warrants this particular attention? The possibility that we're utterly ordinary, just another data point in a vast catalog of developing civilizations, is somehow as chilling as the thought that we might be singular. But perhaps the most unsettling possibility is this: they've been here all along, woven into our history so thoroughly that we mistake their presence for our own development. Embedded in our myths, our religions, our unexplained technological leaps, the angels and demons of our ancestors, the gods who descended from the sky, the mysterious benefactors who appeared at crucial moments to share forbidden knowledge. Maybe we've been interpreting the evidence of our observers through the limited lens of our primitive understanding, translating their interventions into the language of the supernatural because we lacked any other framework. They might not be waiting in distant star systems, planning their eventual approach. They might be here now, walking among us in forms we cannot recognize, observing from a dimensional perspective we cannot perceive, operating on timescales that make our entire recorded history seem like a brief afternoon. The silence continues. The stars remain cold and distant. And somewhere, perhaps, notes are being taken. The observation continues with the patience of immortal minds, with the detachment of scientists who view us not as equals but as subject. Fascinating subjects, perhaps, worthy of study and preservation. But subjects nonetheless. Right now, in this very moment, as you consider these words and perhaps glance upward at the night sky, something might be looking back, recording your reaction, noting this precise stage of your civilization's development, maintaining its perfect silence, waiting with a patience that transcends human comprehension. The zoo remains sealed. We remain the exhibits, and the watching continues, eternal and inscrutable, in the vast darkness between the stars. That's where this journey ends for tonight. If you made it all the way here, subscribe and hit the bell for more long-form stories like this. Check out the videos on screen for more right now. Drop your own experiences in the comments below. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.